Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a very interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Hog House Model T Gen 2. Excuse the marks there on the edge. That was from me carrying and using this knife because I carried this knife a lot. I was really pleased with the aesthetic of this. This is the type of knife that I really just enjoy putting in my pocket. So I went out of my way and carried it substantially more than a lot of other things that are on my review rotation. And I'm happy to say that I really enjoyed this. So for those of you unfamiliar, who is Hog House Knives? They're a company that is producing semi-custom / custom, depending on how you define that, knives out of Finland. Now, these are all in-house. Nothing is outsourced to my knowledge, and these are small batch. That's going to make them very expensive and absolutely deserving of the title semi-custom. Where are we in competition zone? We are in Herman territory. We are in Holt territory. Your Koenig knives, right? There's your Brown knives, your Oz Machine Company knives. That's the territory that we're in, and they have definitely found their place. These are ridiculously high quality. You'll probably remember how much I ranted and raved about the Veli, which is still my favorite model, but there's some elements here that I really wish that they would bring to the Veli. This is truly spectacular. I can't wait to share with you guys. These are made to order, and I think there's like a 6-month, like once you order them, you wait like 6 months, and then your order will come through. But they're going to ship from Finland. I will link their page right down in the description so that you guys can take a look if you want to. Thanks so much to Hog House Knives for providing this sample for review. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. Let's go ahead and get a measurement here. This is larger than the original Model T, if I remember correctly. I don't have the original Model T, so I can't do a size comparison, but I will give you the overall length, which is almost 8 inches, 7.9 inches. It is deceptively large in a really good way. Everything about this knife feels really, almost everything about this knife feels really good. The blade length is almost, it's like 3.45 inches, almost 3.5 inches. And your cutting edge is, again, almost exactly 3.5 inches. Really good ratios on this guy. Really spectacular. The camera not knowing what to do with that stepped blade there. We'll talk about that in a second. It's really cool. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons. Any custom skills you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and Others. So up against the 80-10 and the 80-20.5. It's longer than you might think, but it's not big in any way. It's a little more lengthy than some people might think, but super compact in, I guess, every other dimension. Let's go ahead and put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. I think some people will be shocked to see how close it is in size to the PM2. Look how much more cutting edge you get, though. Crazy. This is such a cool design. Let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue, and the Hogue Deca. There we go. Okay, how's the action? Something about my Veli that I thought was fine, but could be better, was the pivot smoothness. It was smooth, but tight. And while it did break in, it never felt like this. This is ridiculously smooth. Can you guys do an updated Veli with this, whatever you're doing here? They have a custom cage for their ceramic bearings, so they are creating the cage for the ceramic bearings, which is pretty cool. I have to imagine that, they're doing that so that they can control every aspect of the action. You can see there that it's close to a double clutch, like where the detent ball actually comes up on the face of the blade. But if you watch here, bam, detent ball on the face of the blade, turn it, and incredibly controlled action. This is my favorite type of action. Guillotine smoothness, to me, is not ideal because I don't want to have to be like, oh, I have to be paying attention to every little element of this disengagement so that I don't, cut into my finger. I want it to be smooth, and I like fall shut action, but I want it to be controlled. This is the product of extremely tight and precision tolerances. The pivot also on the inside does not feel gritty or lumpy or anything. You can't feel it. That is superior pivot action and is the action that we should expect, not suspect, expect from knives in this tier. This type of action does feel superior to your $300, $400, $500 knives, right? In some situations, I'll be honest with you, We Knives is a company that has almost mastered this at a much lower price point, but there is still a subtle difference between something like this and something like, a really, really nice magic sauce We knife, as I have been saying here lately. But We Knives, in my opinion, is kind of a special case. They're doing something, where their knives are kind of evolving past other super high-end Chinese production knives in their direct price point. So this specific action, at least from my perspective, is still exclusive to this much higher price territory, right? So whether or not it's worth it to you, it's going to be your own choice. But this is really, really spectacular, and it is still something special that we don't really start to see until we're experiencing knives at this price point. The disengagement of the lock bar is good. It's not cut below the show side scale, but there's enough room to get in there, and I don't feel pinched. And the lock bar tension does not feel, super aggressive to the point where it's annoying to disengage. Where there is something slightly annoying for me, it's not a deal breaker, it's just something to be aware of. This is a knife that should be light switch. You see me slip off the end there, and that's because there is no jimping. Now, it's knocked down at the edges, and that's fine. Slightly sharp right here, no big deal. Push buttoning this knife is not comfortable. I would recommend light switching it. But because there's no jimping, it's a little bit of a slip and a bump over that little sharp. It's one of those things where it's kind of hard to explain until you actually handle it. This is probably my least favorite part of the knife, but it's still good. If I was going to give it a letter grade, the actual break of the detent and the pivot smoothness, the sound, right, all the pivot action, that's all great. It's specifically my interaction with this flipper tab that's just kind of okay. I might give it a B- if I was going to letter grade it. It's just not perfectly satisfying. And it's so noticeable with the contrast of everything else about this knife that is so spectacular. So again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just less comfortable than I would have hoped for. I think there's a little ledge right here, and I see what they're trying to do is kind of like lessen, I guess, the overall profile. Just kind of give it some character and lessen the overall, give you better access to it with, not like, if they kept the frame out here, then the whole flipper tab would be smaller and even more pokey, right? If you try to push button this knife, it kind of comes around and pinches you right here. Not bad. It's just annoying. But the whole experience just doesn't feel good. Light switching it is fine, and you'll adapt to it and get the hang of it. It's just less than perfect, right? Can you reverse flick it? You absolutely can. And it's actually a pretty good experience. Honestly, I find that reverse flicking it is just the way that I want to do it. You can get in there in that little groove, and it's sharp enough to catch your fingernail, but not so sharp that it's annoying or feels unfinished. It's just good. So if you are like really buying this because you want some incredibly nice flipper, everything's great, and the flipper itself is just kind of okay. If you don't really care about that and you're like, I'm going to flip it, sometimes I'm going to do the reverse flick or whatever sometimes, and it's pretty good, right? But the pivot action specifically is very, very nice, and the detent is absolutely tuned very, very well. There we go. Nice and clicky. Let's do carry profile. Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. This knife is just really, really friendly. It's not thick, but the scales are contoured and substantial enough to make you feel like you're not carrying a little teeny tiny dainty knife. Now, I've always said the size of the knife doesn't necessarily dictate the final price tag in a huge way, but it is part of it for sure. I don't like hyper expensive, teeny tiny little knives. Like, that's just me personally. This does not feel like a teeny tiny knife. This feels very intentionally lightweight, compact without feeling delicate, right? Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. This is such a friendly knife profile. This was a knife that I carried in jeans, in cargo shorts, even in dress pants. I threw it in my pocket for essentially everything, and I love that. I love knives that feel comfortable in essentially any setting. It's a knife that can be carried in an environment where you might use it a little harder. And it's also a knife that is perfectly at home in a more dressy or formal environment. It just feels right. It's so cool. I don't know exactly how to explain it. I found that just right size, at least for me. So yeah, it's really, really friendly in the pocket. No issues there. Let's go ahead and weigh it while I have my eyes on the scale. So we're looking at, for materials, beautifully contoured and machined titanium. You will have options for, I think it's, if I read correctly on the website, it's like a silicon nitride, maybe silicon carbon something. I'm not familiar with that coating. I don't know if it's, comparable to like your Cerakote or your PVD. Basically, if you want a black finish on the knife, there's an option there. You can also anodize like the pocket clip and the hardware. There's a bunch of different options there if you don't want like the silvery finish. But yeah, those are your options on the website. Obviously, adding options to this knife is going to increase the price you're going to pay for those things. The one you're looking at here, to my knowledge, is the least expensive variation. So we have beautifully contoured and textured titanium clip, titanium backspacer, and then we have an RWL 34 blade that's been hardened to 62. A lot of people hear RWL 34 and they think, oh, for that much money, it should be something like M390 or what. RWL 34 is a blade steel composition that is incredibly friendly to the user. It's easy to work with, and it also has a fantastic balance, is most comparable to CPM 154, which is one of my favorite steels of all time. You can think what you want about the blade steel. I'm used to seeing this blade steel on knives that are substantially more expensive and some that are less expensive. We definitely do not see RWL 34 in budget knives. It is exclusive to a more premium price point and will perform well and be very, very friendly if you choose to use this knife. The blade is intentionally stepped and it looks like it would hang you up during use. It's really, really shallow. You can feel it, but it's not incredibly bumpy. So it might slow you down a little bit. Truthfully, using this knife, which was very, very minimal, I was just cutting open packages and boxes here and there, doing little things outside, or just whenever I needed to use a knife, right? I didn't really notice it. I was pretty happy with it. Nothing was really getting hung up. But obviously, if you're going to use this more often, and if you're using a super, low drag blade geometry and using your knife all the time, some people might notice it a little bit more, right? So just to be perfectly honest, yes, you can feel it, but not a lot. It's pretty shallow. So anyways, your weight on this guy, is there milling for weight reduction? Yes, there is. I think you can kind of see in there. Definitely. I bet you this weighs slightly over 3. Yeah, 3.1 ounces. I can't stress enough how perfect that is for me. It's just above that 3-ounce mark where I'm still going to remember that the thing is in my pocket, but the ratios are phenomenal for a full titanium knife that's almost 8 inches. This is ridiculous. Like, this knife shatters so many of my own personal rules for carrying what I think I'll enjoy or what I want. It feels like I'm carrying a small lightweight knife until I get it out and I'm like, oh yeah, the thing is actually a really good sized knife. It's actually a substantial item, So anyways, let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I would get out my tools, which are extremely inexpensive and extremely recommendable. That'll take care of about 99% of your maintenance needs when it comes to your knife. They're linked in the description or the pinned comment in chat. But this has custom, the flathead hardware, and a lot of people don't like that. They make this themselves. These aren't generic flathead screws, right? They actually make these, and they are titanium. So aesthetically, it's going to come down to your individual, tastes. Some people don't care. Like for me, I don't care. I actually think it looks kind of cool. Truthfully, I'm going to tell you what this makes me think of and why it doesn't bother me. I have a thing when it comes to watches where I hate the little, where you have to put the band in the thing, and you have to hammer it through the little pins. I hate that. The teeny tiny little flathead screws are not necessarily an absolute joy to work with, but I like them so much more. And I've got it in my head every time I see on a watch that I want, when they have screw down links, I'm just like, oh, thank God. And I just feel it looks better. It gives me this feeling of like a higher quality item. So maybe I'm a little biased. I actually kind of like how that looks. It makes me think of a fancy watch. But other people are going to look at this and say it makes me think of a crappy knife from Walmart, right? I mean, it just depends on how you feel about that. I kind of like that this has the center slot. It doesn't go all the way through. I think that would have looked particularly bad on the pivot. That looks nice. But the rest of the little screws, they don't bother me. Might be a little bit tricky and a little bit annoying to disassemble this knife by using like the little tiny flathead screwdrivers that you would have in like, this is like a cheaper bit set, right? But some of the smaller ones here. The other thing is if you don't get the exact right size, you will dick up that hardware. And a lot of people point out Torx screws are so much better. They're easier to grab. They're less likely to strip. It's also less likely that you're going to leave a really ugly mark on the screw if you ever need to disassemble it. And that is true. This is a really expensive knife. And while putting a little mark on the fastener is not a big deal to somebody who's going to use their knives, you know, like people say, oh, who cares? As a user, like, who cares if there's a mark on the screw, you know, use your stuff. There's some validity to that. The problem is, for me, is I don't want to see it personally. I don't want to see the marks on there. It's going to make me feel bad with a super expensive knife. And I don't want to continuously screw up the, well, mess up the, screw up the screws to the point where they are unusable or stripped out and I can't back them out or screw them back in. That's annoying. Fortunately, the box includes some additional, like a couple of additional screws, which is nice. They're just small and there's not a lot of depth there, you know? So I think they look cool. Sorry, I just bumped the camera. We're shaking all over the place. They look cool. They look fancy. I would have just preferred Torx, honestly, in terms of maintenance, right? So it might be a downside for some of you and not for others. If you're really good at picking exactly the right size of flathead and being very careful, then you'll be just fine. But it might be a little tricky or it might be a little frustrating for some people. So just keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and measure the blade stock thickness here real quick. And then we can move on into the meat and potatoes of the review. So the blade stock thickness is probably about 125, 130. No, it's even less, 119 thousandths. Not a thick blade. All right, meat and potatoes time. This is a beautiful object. I absolutely love the texturing here. And I love how we have this, you know, divider line between this sort of heavier boomerang style pattern and then into like the fine diagonal pattern. This absolutely beautiful contouring. It's so smooth out at the edges. This feels like a completed knife, as it should at this price point, but very, very completed. There's no part of this knife that feels or looks unfinished. Absolutely love it. Is there a bald spot underneath that clip? No, there isn't. I had no issue. I just assumed that there was because it was so smooth in and out of the pocket. The texturing is very, very fine, not really grabby. It's more of an aesthetic texturing. There's texturing on the inside of this. Somebody told me that this is, it's obviously the result of machining this area into the blade, but you can kind of choose apparently if you want lines like this left behind. So they could have made this smooth, but they didn't. They left that in there intentionally. Some people might look at that and think that it looks unfinished. I don't. I think it looks really good, especially, you know, in like the surrounding flat is smooth and polished. And then we have these steps right here on the bevel that leads down to the final apex of the blade. So I think the blade looks incredible. It's perfectly even in terms of aesthetic charm, I guess, between the blade and the handle. You don't have like an overly textured handle and like kind of a boring blade, which would have still looked nice on this. It's just an even amount of stuff going on between the blade and the handle. I just think it's very, very balanced. It actually, in terms of a real balance, right behind the pivot, which is really, really nice. I love the Hog House logo on the pivot and how we have like nothing else anywhere except for right here, which says Model T Gen 2. Probably could have left that off or put it on the inside of the backspacer or something, maybe the inside of the frame. I don't know that I love it right there, but honestly, I don't know that I noticed. I can't remember if I saw it in the unboxing. I kind of forgot about it until just now. So looking at it in the camera and like perfect lighting, it's a little bit annoying, not bad. Probably should have been on the inside. That's really all I can say about it. Ergonomically, sorry, so that's what I mean there. If you have your fingers on the frame and you slip off that, it's not that the detune's not tuned correctly. There's just nothing holding my finger onto this. And I know I need to light switch it. So sometimes I just kick off the back of it. Slightly annoying. How are the ergonomic lines of this knife? It's pretty good, right? You have the flipper tab that kind of curves up and just comes straight over. It doesn't really poke into your hand. I have exactly enough room to grab onto this knife, and the edges are nicely knocked down, and it is contoured. It's just kind of exactly what you'd expect with the shape of this handle. There's nothing really hand melting going on here. It does feel a little bit slippery because, like I said, the texturing is more aesthetic than it is functional, but it feels fine. I kind of wish there was something up here to help me lock in with my thumb. I think that might help a little bit with gripitude, but it's okay. Ergonomically, it's fine. It feels comfortable. There's a chance that you will drop it. It's a little bit slick. That's about all I can say. The cutting bevel is amazing. This is a beautifully sharp blade. I have not touched this up at all. The cutting geometry is I guess on the thinner side versus your average knife, but nowhere near as thin or slicey as something like an Opinel, right? But even after using this, not like insanely hard, just for whatever, right? The edge is still absolutely fine. I think, this is on the harder side for RWL 34. So RWL 34 is no king of edge retention, but it's still going to have pretty good edge holding capabilities at 62, while still being relatively tough and definitely stainless. This is just a really good balance of composition. It works, and when it's time to touch it up, when it's time to bring that edge back to life, a strop will do that for the most part. It's going to be a while, unless you're like really pounding on this thing. It'll be a while until you have to reprofile it, right? I don't know what it's going to be like sharpening into those little ridges. I imagine you just power through it. I don't know that there's enough there to make that much of a difference. It probably won't be the case on this knife unless you're using it constantly and you're constantly resharpening it. I've never had to sharpen into something that has those little ridges, so I don't know if that's going to cause an issue or if you're just not really going to notice it. I would lean on the side of you probably just sharpen it like normal, and it probably doesn't make much of a difference, right? So if you've dealt with that before, again, these are really, really shallow. If you've dealt with that and it does make some sort of difference, then comment on it, but I would imagine this is a pretty straightforward process. Just a ridiculously glassy, sharp edge. It feels so high quality, and it's even all the way to the tip there. This is such a beautiful area of the knife where all of these lines sort of meet together so perfectly. Everything is so micro precision, so nice. I love little tiny details like that. There's no lanyard hole. There's nothing there. I don't care. Some of you might. There's also no lefty mounting position. Unless I'm mistaken, they don't make a lefty version of this knife, but if I'm wrong about that, please point it out. Sorry, my wife's coming home. You can hear the horn there. But the pocket clip cannot be mounted for left-handed carry. So this is, as far as I know, right hand only, which is a bummer. I really wish that they would find a way to integrate the pocket clip and make it optimized for left-handed people as well as right-handed people. But we live in a right-hand knife world. We live in a right-handed world, pretty much, period. You have a steel lock bar insert that doubles as the over-travel stop on this knife, which is par for the course. You have a stop pin that is located in its standard spot, very deep shouldering there. Absolutely no blade play up, down, left, or right. No hint of lock stick. This is a very well-made titanium frame lock. Not what I'd call a hard-use knife, but Hoghouse definitely knows how to make a frame lock with good geometry, good lockup, nice and solid. No slip or lock rock or anything like that. Just really, really nice. No blade play, no pivot lash, and super luxuriously smooth all the way down into the closed position with a proper detent medium. I would say maybe even, I think it feels medium heavy because I feel so likely to slip off of that flipper tab. This has also remained perfectly centered the entire time that I've had it. I have not had to adjust it. No detent lash. So, for those of you who are familiar with this semi-custom small batch in-house territory, you're going to know exactly, especially with the companies mentioned, you're going to know what price point we're in, right? So let me be clear. This is not a knife that is meant to cater to everyone. This is a knife that is meant to cater to enthusiasts who like to carry and use their knives, but they want something hyper precision. They want that extra, right? Even if what they're paying for goes beyond utility, right? That's why people spend this type of money on knives. It's not because they think that they're getting some sort of advanced benefit in terms of utility. Utility can be found, like really perfect utility in terms of a knife can be found right around 30 to 50 bucks and you're good to go. The reason that people spend more on knives is for all of the extra things surrounding that. We want that precision. We want that detail. We want that smoothness. We want the satisfaction of that stuff. We also, a lot of us really like it when something is made in small batches, right? When extra attention is paid to each individual knife and it's not just sort of stamped and pressed on an assembly line. That's something that's a big deal for some people, certainly not everybody, right? So the base price of these knives, given the fact that doing this small batch in-house in Finland is not going to be cheap, right? If you want a cheap knife, you need a knife that's manufactured, stamped, and pressed in China. This is not that far from it. These knives are going to start out at $836. Wow, a lot of money for a pocket knife, right? Is that a fair price? Directly comparing it with its realistic competition, which again is not just knife, as much as some people want that to be the case. Directly comparing it to its fair competition, which, like I said, Holt, Brown, Oz Machine Company, Koenig, Herman Knives, or even Shirogorov knives. Is that a fair price tag? I think kind of. Once you cross over that $800 mark, it's like, wow, like Herman's over 800 are usually bringing some other slightly interesting element, kind of, right? A lot of people would say that they want to see something like M398 or some exotic steel on the knife at that price point. I don't know, maybe, right? They feel slightly high. I think that I would have been really, really happy at about $750, maybe $775, but I was really hoping to see that this knife would come in under $800. Slightly high, but it will definitely impress anyone who is familiar with knives at this price point, right? Everything at this price point kind of feels a little high, but at the same time, it's really hard to compete with it realistically because these are like, the next step up from here is essentially a full-on custom, right? That has its own like weird elements and things to consider. So this is about the highest quality type of, knife you can expect to find when we're talking about a machine-produced knife, right? I mean, you can get substantially more complex, but when it comes to the tolerances and the precision and the luxurious action feeling, like this is definitely top tier before you get into the exotic and wild sort of branch out categories, right? So yeah, the people who are familiar with this territory will be very, very impressed and very pleased with the knife for their money, feeling maybe like, they could have gotten something similar for slightly less with some companies. If you are more comfortable at a lower price point, and, it's like the idea of paying for this stuff, these particular things is not really appealing to you. Yeah, stay down at the like $200 to $300. If you're more like relating price to materials, and you just want to get something that's like complex. You don't really care if it's made in China, right? You just want the materials and like that precision feel. And yeah, obviously you can get something, right around the $300 territory from a company like that's very, very impressive, right? So it's only going to be for select people, but that's kind of who I'd recommend it to. Definitely not everybody. I love this, and this is going to stay in my collection. I am very, very impressed with it. So that's going to be it today, guys. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.